Hey guys, so for this chapter, we're going to be talking about flexibility training and some of the different concepts of that. Oh, come on. All right, so objectives. Okay, we're explaining the effects of muscle imbalances on the human movement system, rationale of using flexibility, differentiate between various types of flexibility techniques, and perform and instruct appropriate flexibility techniques for given situations. All right, so what is flexibility? Okay, flexibility can be simply described as the ability to move a joint through its complete range of motion. Range of motion of a joint is dictated by the normal extensibility of all soft tissue surrounding it. Everyone's range of motion is going to be a little different, and that's just as genetics, how you develop, sport-specific needs, and so forth. For example, a tennis athlete on their serving hand has a significant amount of external rotation than the normal individual. Where I can go back just past 90 degrees of external rotation, they can go back maybe an additional 90 degrees farther than I can. Okay, that's specific towards their sport and then their needs. But I have significantly more internal rotation than they would as a result, and so forth. And then the neuromuscular efficiency is to recruit and connect the correct muscles to produce force, reduce force, and dramatically stabilize on all three planes of motion. Now, flexibility in the three different planes of motion. Example that they give is the latissimus dorsi, or your lats, if you think of it. Okay, so in the sagittal plane, okay, given dividing myself in left and right halves, everything's going like forward and back. Okay. Proper extensibility to allow proper shoulder flexion. For example, the lats mainly do shoulder extension, internal rotation, and adduction. Okay, so for the sagittal one, okay, sagittal plane. So for to allow proper shoulder flexion. So if my lats are really tight, that's one restriction which would not allow me to get in a lot of shoulder flexion. Okay. The frontal plane has a proper extensibility to allow proper shoulder abduction. Okay, so abducted. Okay, so if my lats are again really tight, I would lose a lot of range of motion in abduction. Okay, last one, transverse plane, which is the rotation. So that would very much limit some of my rotations, especially internal rotation. Okay, because it would be really, really stuck here, and I can't pull in as hard as I could. Okay, that's just an example that he gives. You got to think of when you think of a muscle and like you're trying to get more flexible in that position. You got to attack maybe the different planes is a good viewpoint. Another one is the biceps. Okay, the bicep brachii. Okay, down here. Okay, your biceps does three motions in itself. It does elbow flexion, shoulder flexion, and it also does supination. Okay, I mean it's not like a crazy big supinator, but it does do supination. So you got to make sure if you're doing, if your bicep has a lot of issues, you address all those different areas. Okay, can that person fully pronate? Okay, can they fully extend? Okay, can they fully go into shoulder extension? Okay, if they kind of are lacking in one of those areas as compared bilaterally, you may have a really, really tight biceps. Postural distortions. Okay, so postural distortion patterns are a kind of misalignment of one or more segments of the human movement system. Related flexibility or altered movement patterns is the process in which the human movement system seeks the path of least resistance during functional movement patterns. So what happens is if you have an issue wrong with your body compensates. It does a really, really, really good job at compensating to a point where you don't, it's very subtle. And it's going to do that in a way that it's going to not need to work as hard. So what's a good example off the top of my head? instead of having your lower trap activate to shoulder retraction to allow for that, it may put more emphasis on your biceps. Okay, but then you're not going to get that full extension like you would like during a pull-up, for example. Okay, so if I'm doing a pull-up, I have to kind of retract and depress my scaps, okay, during the motion. Okay, otherwise I'll just stay here, okay, instead of being all the way down there. Probably wasn't the best example to use, but that's probably a good one in itself. Okay. Flexibility training must be a multifaceted approach, integrated various flexibility techniques to achieve the optimal soft tissue extensibility in all planes of motion. Better understand flexibility training, we need to review the human movement system, muscle balances, and neuromuscular efficiency. One good thing to really point out there is there's a lot of different ways to achieve the same goal. In terms of like to increase extensibility of a muscle, there's massage, there's foam rolling, there's obviously stretching, a number of different things. And therapies, there's the tool assisted where you use like Graston, when they take like the really dull butter knife and kind of like scrape the different areas. That's one way they can use it. We'll talk a little about that here in a minute, which is very similar to like foam rolling. The Theragun or whatever the gun that just compresses, repeated hits you. That's one. Limited flexibility. Okay, so poor flexibility leads to the development of relative flexibility. Phenomenon of the human movement system seeks the path of least resistance during functional movement patterns. This leads to muscle imbalances. So if you lack flexibility in one area, your body's going to compensate and make it up in another. For example, cheerleading. When that individual goes and does like the splits, okay, we'll just do the front and back. If you lack the flexibility to do that in whatever muscle, it's going to compensate in other muscles and joints. So let's say if you lack it in the hip flexion extension, like one leg goes back, one goes forward. If your muscles don't allow that, what's it do is now it's going to rotate your hips to allow for a greater motion there. And hips aren't supposed to move that much. I mean, they only rotate like 2 to 3 degrees, which is really nothing. Muscle balances. Okay, results in reciprocal inhibition, synergistic dominance, arthrokinetic dysfunction, decreased neuromuscular control. We're going to know more about this here in a minute. So muscle balances, okay, so there's altered reciprocal inhibition. This is caused by the agonist, okay, or that primary muscle, which inhibits its functional antagonist. Okay, so like that tight agonist. So let's say you have tight hamstrings. Okay, that's if your hamstrings are really, really tight and not allowing the full extensibility, it's going to really limit and inhibit, which is just decreasing the amount of force, example, that your quads could exert. Okay, because you need a little bit of balance. Synergistic dominance. Okay, so this occurs when your synergist takes over a functional or a weak or inhibited prime mover. So a synergist is like an assisted muscle. For example, we're talking about hip flexion in your distance runner. So you have constant hip flexion which occurs. So your hip flexors are going to be really, really dominant. At one point, let's say they're weak, or because of some kind of inhibited prime mover, they're not functioning properly. We get this like other muscles that act as your prime mover, but aren't really, because they more just do a lot of like stability, or like their secondary function is like hip flexion. So those are going to start taking over. So as a result, these other muscles are really going to flare up. They're going to get irritated. You get a lot of tendinitis, other various issues that could come up. as a result of that inhibited or weak primary muscle or antagonist or agonist. Sorry. A good example of this is hamstrings. Okay, so when we like stand up, sit down, all that stuff, we use our hamstrings and our glutes a lot. But what really happens is we don't utilize our glutes to its full potential most of the time. So as a result, we'll have this poor, I'm guessing more combine this a little bit more of the neuromuscular efficiency. Our hamstrings will take over the hip extension over our glutes. Sorry, like our gluteus maximus, our big butt muscle, should be our primary hip extensor. Okay, but everyone relies on their hamstrings for that hip extension so much that it is their glutes end up being weaker, and then we put more stress on our hamstrings to do the same function. For example, the sprinters, or if you sprint, not saying if you're a sprinter in general, if you do a really, really good sprint, and you're not relying solely on your glutes for that hip extension, which should be your prime ones because that produces the most force throughout your body, especially during locomotion, you're going to put excessive stress on your hamstrings, which results in a lot of hamstring strains, for example, and tears and so forth. That's a really, really common one you'll see. Next one is arthrokinetic dysfunction. So altered forces on the joint results in abnormal joint movement and proprioception. So a good example of this is go to baseball, or really every overhead sport. And this is a really, really common one. So altered forces on the joints, for example, everyone benches or throws, or everything goes forward, okay, whether you're throwing or not, okay. So as a result of that and all the training to really develop those muscles on the anterior side of you results in this abnormal forces on these joints. Especially your glenohumeral joint, okay, which is like your shoulder. Excuse me. Which results is, let's say the ball is the ball and socket in the shoulder. The ball is going to be the ball, and then this hand. I have a better thing here. Let's work out. Okay. And then my hat's going to be the socket. Okay. So it should fit normally right there, right in the middle, okay, of this ball and socket. But as a result of all of this excessive or overemphasis on this development of our anterior muscles and not a lot on our posterior muscles in our back, the socket, or sorry, the ball tends to move forward in the socket. So if I was in this shoulder, okay, instead of my ball sitting pretty like evenly, it's going to be sitting more anteriorly because all that development of all of our anterior muscles just pulls that ball and socket instead of being that normal position here. It pulls it anteriorly, okay, and so I don't have this really efficient movement that happens here and results in a lot of injuries and stresses that isn't normal. And then it takes a good amount of time and training to train that ball to move back in that normal socket joint. That's just an example I can think of. Next one's going to be neuromuscular efficiency, the ability of the nervous system to properly coordinate muscle actions. Have you ever seen a swimmer run? If you're a swimmer, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They're just not, it's a coordination issue, really, is because, let's say a swimmer, water polo athlete, they're very, very dominant in the water, okay? Cardiovascular-wise, this efficiency of like treading water and so forth, okay? But you move them to a different area, let's say you put them on dry land and you have them go run the mile, it's borderline funny just because it's like watching a giraffe walk for this first time. No offense if you're a swimmer, but a lot of swimmers and water individuals are not accustomed to a lot of land exercises. So they lack a lot of that neuromuscular efficiency. They know how to do it, but they don't know how to do it efficiently. Okay. So as a result, like they can still go through the motions, they can still achieve the same outcomes, but just not. I won't say the same outcomes. They can get it done, but it's going to take them a lot longer. Okay. Same thing if you take a football player, okay, that's all their training is done on a field, and then you move them to a basketball setting. Okay, well, still running, but their way of running is a little differently. I mean, this is a very much in-depth area of move them from just the grass to a court, move them from a surface that absorbs a good amount of force to a surface, the basketball court, usually the wood, that usually has a good amount of rebound. It takes them a week or so to fully adjust to that, and they don't really realize it. But when you first watch them do that transition over, they have to run a little differently. Versus the area like grass where you have to get your knees up a little bit higher when you do like the sprints acceleration, because you have to almost overemphasize because you have to, the body just adapts for the giving way of the grass and the dirt and so forth. Where on they move to the basketball court, they get more springy, so they end up running a little differently. Okay, so but after a while, your nerves and muscles get more coordinated, and then they're running very, very efficiently. Okay, these are the examples I've seen throughout my time. So like when you first take someone that hasn't worked out in a long time, maybe it's you or someone else you're taking through, the first time working out or doing a said motion, it's going to be very, very awkward. So usually this is the time where you just want to more get like technique, get them in the groove of things before you go balls to the wall. Okay, and usually after the first like time or two, or first like few sessions of that, they get more coordinated. They're more efficient. They can do it usually a lot easier with less wasted momentum. Mechanical receptors. Okay, first we're going to talk about the muscle spindles. Okay, so this is a major sensory organ of the muscles. Okay, so it's sensitive to change in length and rate of the sensitive to change in length and rate of length change. Sorry, mouthful. Okay, so this is a sensory organ actually within the muscle. Every single muscle has one. So the muscle is lengthened. The spindles are stretched. Okay, this information is transmitted to the nervous system, exciting the muscle spindles and thus causing the muscle fibers to contract. This results in spasm in that area of the muscle or a feeling of tightness. Okay, so muscle spindles really exhibit what's called reciprocal inhibition. So a contraction of the agonist causes a reflex relaxation in the antagonist muscle, allowing it to stretch and protect it from injury. So example is an active hamstring stretch. So the hip is in an active flexion. Okay, so let's say you're lying on your back and you're taking your leg up just on your no hands, just lifting it up. Okay, as far as you can. So at the end range of motion, tension is felt in hip flexor muscles. Okay, the muscle spindles. Okay, that signal is sent to the central nervous system, up to the brain, and then back down to tell your hamstrings to relax. That allows for further range of motion. Okay, that's just an example. Come on. Next one could be the Golgi tendon organs. Okay, so this is located within the musculotendinous junction. Okay, so the musculotendinous junction is where on the muscle, okay, the muscle belly, and at each end of the muscle, you have tendons, which is attached down to the bone. Okay, so the areas where the muscle and tendons kind of interact between one another is where these Golgi tendons originate. Okay, so these are, I said, the changes in muscular tension and rate of tension change. Okay, so proper stimulation can cause relaxation of an overactive muscle, usually autogenic inhibition. Okay, which is the relaxation of the antagonist muscle during contractions. Okay, so another example, another active hamstring stretch. Okay, so again, you're laying your back. The hip is in active flexion. At the end range of motion, tension is felt on the hamstring Golgi tendon organ. Okay, signal is sent to the central nervous system, which go over to the hip flexor to limit force production, preventing injury from excessive tension. All right, now we're talking about pattern overload. Okay, consistently repeating the same pattern of motion, training the same way, repetitive movements at work, and sedentary lifestyle. So we don't want a lot of this pattern overload is really what it is. A lot of what we do in our normal day-to-day lives. For example, I have 2 kids. I have my second one's 5 months old when I'm recording this. I always carry my kids in my left arm. Okay, for one, I'm left-handed, so I always carry my kids in my left arm. As a result, my left arm, my bicep, is significantly stronger. But after doing it for so long, I get a lot of like pains going on my left side. I mean, nothing crazy, but I'm like, it took me a while to realize that I always carry my kid in my left hand. Maybe because I'm more secure in my left hand versus my right. This is preference-wise. So that's very much a kind of pattern overload that I do. So the injury cycle that they talk about is, let's say you have some kind of tissue trauma, which causes inflammation, the muscle to spasm, and then you get adhesions. Adhesions are, the best way I can describe it is your muscles get stuck all the different like layers. Let's say you have like 2 or 3 layers of muscle, okay, and then you have fascia, which is a kind of connective tissue that kind of covers everything. You also have fascia in between those different layers. On the outer layer of fascia, which keeps everything kind of in place, and then you have like fat and skin and so forth. So in all these areas are supposed to glide over each other very, very nice and smooth. If something gets stuck in there, okay, that is the best way I can teach you of what an adhesion is. You got it stuck and it doesn't really like let go. Okay, so you have to work that way out in different ways. So that's pretty much what adhesion is, which could result in altered neuromuscular control because now instead of that muscle fully extending or contracting, that adhesion is restricting it, so that control pattern is now thrown off. So you get this muscle imbalance. Results in injury. It goes back to injury results in like some kind of tissue of trauma, and the cycle just goes on and on and on. So you got to break that cycle somehow, wherever it's at. For example, when I held my kid in my left arm all the time, I actually got a neck sprain, like a cervical sprain, and it's one of those like stupid ones where you get to where like you sneeze weird, or you cough, or you get out of bed weird, and you get that really kind of kink in your neck, and it takes like 2 or 3 days for it to kind of work itself out. And it's not really like overly painful, but it's a pain in the neck, literally. Okay, so I actually developed one of these, and I felt like an idiot for one, because I knew exactly what I did. But 2, now I had to break the cycle. And there's a number of different ways that I use that everyone's a little different on what they have access to and training and so forth. But I used, one, I didn't want to just rest it all the time because that's not the best way for healing for everything. But I needed to correct the issue, which besides carrying my kid in my right arm, I needed to, one, work the different upper posterior muscles of my back a little bit more emphasis on my right side to kind of even out a little bit, and then use various modalities and meds and so forth. All right, so getting on to the flexibility continuum, they like to call it. Excuse me. So flexibility should follow a systematic progression. Okay, so you have corrective flexibility, which is designed to improve muscular imbalances and altered arthrokinematics. Then you have active flexibility, which is designed to improve the extensibility of soft tissue and increase neuromuscular efficiency. Uses reciprocal inhibition. And then you have functional flexibility, which is integrated multiplanar soft tissue extensibility with optimal neuromuscular control through the full range of motion. Blech. Functional flexibility, can you do it correctly without hurting yourself? Really what it is. Okay, so we have corrective flexibility, which you get through self-myofascial release and static stretching. So the big one through self-myofascial release is just... My kid walked away with it. The one they like to use here with NASM is foam rolling. Or you don't have to use like a specific foam roller if you don't have one, which my kid happened to walk away with mine. But you can use a ball. I like to do the harder the better. You can get foam rollers are great for this because they're usually pretty firm. They roll really nicely. And you get like wider areas. If you use a ball, like you can use a softball, baseball, softball, lacrosse ball, whatever it is, for the same thing. That can really target other areas. And I use self-myofascial release because it's usually doing it to yourself. No one else is doing it to you. So you can spend as much time in the world as you want, usually rolling out. So I can't remember if I talk about this later or not, but a lot of time with the foam roller, you usually put all your body weight on the foam roller on whatever area they're trying to release or loosen up, whatever it is. And you're going to slowly roll out on it, like really slow. And once you find an area that's really tender, aka hurts like hell, you're going to hold it there for 30 seconds to 2 minutes, give or take, until it kind of releases. And then you move on. Foam rolling is not an end goal. Okay, it's a tool that can help, but it shouldn't be solely relied on. Okay, a lot of people believe that, oh, this is like a one-time fix kind of thing. No, it's a thing you got to constantly work on. Maybe it doesn't work best for you. Maybe there's other things that may work a little bit better, or maybe this works amazing for you. Okay, it's not going to work good on everyone, but it's not the worst thing in the world either. Okay. Next thing is static stretch. So a static stretch is just holding a stretch for a long period of time. Okay. So, for example, if I was going to stretch out my wrist flexors, I'm going to take myself into wrist extension. Okay. So one, extend my arm. Okay. And then I'm going to grab my wrist. I'm going to pull it down. Okay. And then I'm going to hold this position, stretching out all the muscles up in here. Okay. For whatever time I want to hold it for. So if I'm trying to get just stretch out, you're looking for about 15-20 seconds per stretch. Now if I'm looking to get more flexible, that's a little different. That's where I'm going to hold it for longer periods of time. Okay, probably at least a minute, maybe up to like 5 or 10 minutes, give or take. Okay, active flexibility. Again, they want you to use self-myofascial release, and then active isolation stretching. So that's just activating that muscle. So that's like, all right, let me kind of, what's the best way to do? Bend over, touch my toes. Okay, but I'm like more sitting down, using a lot of my muscles to achieve that stretch. That's all it is. Okay, or if I'm coming over and I want to stretch, get like all like my lats, all like my side of flexibility. Okay, I'm using my muscles on this side to pull myself over. So that's more like the active isolation stretching. And then the functional flexibility, okay, again, self-myofascial release, and then the dynamic stretches. So here we go, more self-myofascial release. So focuses on the physical system of the body. Gentle pressure applied with implements such as foam rolling. Assists in releasing knots by stimulating the Golgi tendon organ. Okay, so it creates that autogenic inhibition. Also suggested before, static stretches for postural distortion patterns or activity, as well as a useful cool down. I don't think it's the best thing of a cool down. I think it should happen more towards the end or after your cool down. Personally, to get a proper cool down. We'll get to the cool down in the next few weeks. But in a sense, a cool down is opposite of a warm up. You're just doing whatever activity to bring your body back down to a resting levels. That's all it is. So at the end of that, I think is the best time to get a lot of like your static stretches and so forth. But more with these self-myofascial release, given the foam rolling is the best thing, but you can really target, especially look in the book, it really shows you some different areas to get. The gastrocnemius is a big one. That one should be like a daily thing, just because that usually gets really, really tight. The most painful I've done has actually been the lat rollout. And you look in the book where it's pretty much you're laying on your side on it. And I think I almost cried during that one. Worked, but very, very sensitive area when you're getting your lats. And if you want to get more focus, for example, me foam rolling my hamstring with a foam roller is pretty much pointless. I would need some kind of like golf ball or baseball, something that's a little bit smaller to roll out for my hamstrings. And that's just for me. Static stretch, okay, so passively taking the muscle to the point of tension and holding for about 20-30 seconds. Again, if you're really trying to get more flexible, you're looking for a minute plus per stretch. And some of those I'll have some of my like athletes hold for 10 to 15 minutes. But it's not like anything crazy. I'm like, all right, go home after dinner or whatnot when you're watching TV, throw your leg against the wall. Let's say you're trying to stretch a hamstring. Leg against the wall, put your leg up, get a very, very mild stretch, hold it for the entire episode. Try that. Or switch halfway through or every commercial. And that's where you're really, really going to get that, what they call a plastic stretch. And that's where, let's say you have a hairband in, or if you or your wife or girlfriend or whatever has the hairbands. This is the best way I can do. And hairbands are used for a long period of time, and they're usually held in, and they loosen up. Okay, and they get what's called a plastic stretch, to where they'll never go back that same contracted length again. But then you get this; it stretches out a significantly wider area. Active isolating stretching, not my favorite personally. Uses the agonists and synergists to dramatically move the joint into any range of motion. Creates reciprocal inhibition of the functional antagonists. Allows for greater range of motion to be assessed. 5 to 10 reps of each stretch. Hold for 1 to 2 seconds. Let's say I was going to stretch out my lats. Okay. I put my hand over my head. I'm going to bring it over as far as I can. Okay. So I'm holding it. All right. So that's my end range of motion. Okay. Hold it 1 to 2 seconds. Okay. Do it again. Okay. Just try and like reach as far as I can to stretch out all of this. Okay. So yeah, this is what you got. Example of the active isolating stretch. Dynamic stretching, okay, uses the force production of a muscle of the body's momentum to take a joint through the full available range of motion. Also suggested as a pre-activity warm-up if no postural distortion patterns are present or they're significantly reduced. So we're going to have an entire week where we're going to talk about the dynamic stretching and like the dynamic warm-ups. The dynamic warm-ups is pretty much you're just it's more of an active warm-up. Back in the day, even like when I played football in high school, it was all static stretching. But now the most efficient way to do a warm-up is through dynamic stretching. And that's to be the skips, the jumps, the karaoke, all of those. Okay, so I'm not going to get too in-depth right here with the dynamic stretching. The book goes over a few areas of that. But really going to get more in-depth here. I think it's weeks, not 7. This is 7. I think it's 11 or chapter 11 when you get on more like the dynamic warm-ups where we're getting really more in-depth on some of this. And then summary, proper flexibility is the first step to addressing muscle imbalances and movement impairments. First time clients, we use corrective flexibility. Okay, so warm up. And after cool down sessions, cool down is very, very important. A lot of people do forget about the cool down. That can really return your body back down to a inactive, resting levels is very, very important. Also, active and functional flexibility can be implemented in the strength and power levels of the OPT model, which we'll look at here in a little bit. And that is it.